You know, we're at a turning point in the country. And I hope that a part of that continues within pop culture as well. Because unfortunately, so much commentary from those involved in these projects, these franchises that we love so much, create so much unnecessary division. I am all for free speech and people expressing their opinions, and everybody is entitled to their opinion. It's just so unfortunate that oftentimes I think individuals are misguided. I disagree with their views. I think they have a chip on their shoulder, and it's only going to cause more division within the fandom. In this case, what I'm talking about are these comments from John Boyega that we'll dive into. And then we'll get into some positive news this week and some thoughts on A New Hope. I revisited A New Hope this week. I don't know when the last time I watched it was. And had an interesting experience, as always seems to happen when I go and revisit a Star Wars film that I haven't watched in a certain length of time. So really looking forward to the episode this week, and I'm so glad that you've taken time out of your schedule to join me on the show. I hope that you will drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or if you happen to be enjoying this on YouTube, you'll subscribe to the channel on YouTube and leave a comment here. We do have some listener feedback that we will dive into. But first, let's start here. John Boyega says Star Wars was whitest and most elite space while reflecting on racist backlash.
This is not going to go the way you think.
A decade after entering a galaxy far, far away, John Boyega reflects on racism in the Star Wars fandom in a recent interview. The new Apple TV Plus documentary, #1 on the call sheet, which focuses on black leading men and women in Hollywood. They cloned Tyrone Star, it's the name of the film on Netflix, 33 years old, looked back on facing racist backlash while playing Finn in the Star Wars sequel trilogy from 2015 to 2019. First off, I would imagine that John Boyega making these comments is probably a good indication that he's not going to be involved in any future Star Wars projects, or any Star Wars projects coming up in the near future. There was some rumors that potentially he could return in the post-Episode 9 Daisy Ridley film, and I'm hard-pressed to believe that he would make these comments knowing he's going to be involved soon in a Star Wars project, but I could be wrong. Boyega said Star Wars always had the vibe of being the most whitest elite space. This is a franchise that's so white that a black person existing in that was something. You can always tell it's something when some Star Wars fans try to say, well, we had Lando Calrissian and had Samuel L. Jackson. That's like telling me how many cookie chips are on the cookie dough. I'm like, they're scattered. They just scattered that in there, bro. Boyega went on to speak about the racist backlash in Star Wars casting, saying they're okay with us playing the best friend, but once we touch their heroes, once we lead, once we trailblaze, it's like, oh my God, it's just a bit much. They're pandering. I watched the clip where he made these comments, and I'm not over-exaggerating the inflection. As a matter of fact, I would even say that the inflection of John Boyega in the comments that he made were probably a bit more sarcastic and extreme than even what I presented here on the show. Listen, I have thoughts on this, and I want to say up front, right, not being a person of color, being a white man, there's certainly that aspect of this, okay? So let's just be honest. I know that he faced some backlash when it was first announced that he was going to be playing a stormtrooper. And that's incredibly unfortunate, and I don't dismiss that by any stretch. He's certainly entitled to his opinion. It is completely irrational criticism and racism to be criticized simply by the color of his skin and being involved in Star Wars. But beyond that, in my view, it's just sad that he feels this way. As I mentioned, he's only going to cause further unnecessary division within the fandom. I find it rather odd that John Boyega is the most prominent black actor in all of Star Wars. Now, maybe not the most popular. Lando, I mean, depending on what generation of Star Wars you were involved in. I mean, Lando Calrissian was an incredibly popular character during the original trilogy, and, of course, Samuel L. Jackson in his role as Mace Windu. Now, as John Boyega would go and he would dismiss that in saying that this is what Star Wars fans go and point to when we talk about representation or diversity. Well, what response do you expect to get when you're asked about this? When you make the claim that Star Wars is the whitest A, B, C, or D? I mean, Star Wars is an incredibly diverse universe in and of itself, not just as it relates to the actors playing the human element within Star Wars, but just the richness of diversity in the fact that it's filled with all kinds of different characters and aliens and creatures. George Lucas was very much ahead of his time in not only having Princess Leia in the film as a 19-year-old Carrie Fisher, but the fact that he didn't make this character of Princess Leia a damsel in distress. She was a strong, powerful leader, one that was actually pushing the two main actors around in that original film. Now, granted, Lando Calrissian didn't show up until the second film in the franchise, and it was also very indicative of the time as well, and times have certainly changed since then. I would go so far as to argue that going back to the 80s and the inclusion of such a prominent character as Lando in the Star Wars franchise was in and of itself a bit trailblazing and counter to the times in terms of representation in films. That being said, John Boyega, for all intents and purposes, was the co-star of The Force Awakens. Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi, regardless of your opinion of that film, for better or worse, as the character was written, also was the co-star in that film. I mean, he had a major role in The Last Jedi. A complete adventure all to himself that we went on, with Rose Tico, also representative of diversity in that film, given her ethnic background. The trip to Canto Bight, the battle that took place on Crate. I mean, I haven't clocked the actual screen time of John Boyega and Daisy Ridley in the film. Daisy Ridley and Rey obviously being the lead. That was always the case. But the same thing also rings true as you relate to what he did in The Rise of Skywalker. He is, as I mentioned, arguably the biggest, most prominent black actor in all of Star Wars. I mean, that's not even subjective. He held secondary and huge roles in all three of those films. And if he wants to get mad at anyone, beyond any irrational racist criticism he might have received at the onset of the announcement of him playing a black stormtrooper, he should be pointing the finger at the writers and directors of the previous two trilogies. I mean, he clearly has a chip on his shoulders, and he should be talking with J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson. Because, again, apart from any irrational pushback from fans at The Force Awakens, which is, of course, wrong, I've never really seen fans having any issues with him in those films. So I find it all just incredibly unfortunate, because this is already being discussed. I mean, and I even brought it up on the show, and I wrestled with whether or not I wanted to do so, but I found it really interesting that it seems as if this individual has his own personal issues and beef that really aren't objectively true, in my opinion. And I feel like there's something else underneath all of this. What's really interesting to me, too, and I felt comfortable in talking about this on the show specifically because I remember having watched all of the documentaries for all three of the sequel films, which I abundantly enjoy. I've made no secret of that whatsoever. And I enjoy Finn's character in all of those films. If I had any criticisms about that character, it would be, again, in the writing. You know, I do think that there is an argument to be made of him yelling, "Ray!" all the time. I know people have an issue with Finn in the third film. They felt like there was no payoff to Finn wanting to tell Daisy Ridley a secret, but I knew watching the movie what he was alluding to. It was that he was Force sensitive. But when you go watch that original documentary for The Force Awakens, it's really interesting because he's a much different person then. I mean, obviously, he'd been in Attack the Block prior to The Force Awakens. He was already an actor, but this is what really launched him into stardom. And I don't know if he simply hasn't found the success outside of Star Wars that he hoped to find, much in the same way that Daisy Ridley seems to be struggling in that vein as well. I mean, they both seem to be dealing with a similar issue that Mark Hamill did, and not really breaking out as a major star beyond Star Wars and getting into voice acting work. To a lesser extent, Carrie Fisher. I mean, she did do some work outside of Star Wars, but never any major franchises, and was certainly heavily involved in the writing process. But you go back and watch John Boyega in that original documentary, and you know, he's told by J.J. Abrams, "You're the star of Star Wars." And J.J. Abrams wasn't lying to him, in my opinion. You go back and watch The Force Awakens, and you don't have to. We've all seen it. But, again, they are co-stars in this film. And there was never any hiding the fact that Daisy Ridley was going to be the lead character. But John Boyega was one of the main three and certainly received more screen time and attention than Oscar Isaac did in those films. So I just simply disagree with his commentary. He is entitled to his opinion, absolutely. And I don't presume to know what is going on in the mind of John Boyega. But from my perception, I just do not feel that his assessment of the Star Wars franchise, looking through that racial lens, is accurate in my view. And the further negativity in the fandom at a time when Disney is already facing major backlash, it's incredibly, incredibly unfortunate.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
All right, let's get into some good news. I had no idea that this was coming. And it's a bit of a bummer because I don't understand the Disney marketing. I don't know if it's Disney, I don't know if it's Lucasfilm, but I know that maybe this is more indicative of the fact that we're into April. We have Star Wars Celebration Japan coming up in just a few weeks. We'll be getting a lot of future Star Wars information there. But suddenly, out of nowhere, the trailer drops for Star Wars Tales of the Underworld. This will continue the animated anthology series starting on May the 4th. And it looks absolutely fantastic. It's going to bring two Star Wars Clone Wars favorites back into the limelight. So Tales of the Underworld is the next entry in the Tales anthology format. The previously explored stories of the Jedi and Time of the Empire. This time around, it's the criminal underworld that gets a spotlight through the lenses of the returned Asajj Ventress and the Duros bounty hunter Cad Bane. Now, personally, I've had my fill of the Underworld. That being said, this looks really compelling. And I'm very much looking forward to watching it. Especially relating to Asajj Ventress, a character that I've enjoyed ever since the Getty Tartakovsky Clone Wars series of shorts. The two stories will follow Ventress after her return from death in the 2015 book, Dark Disciple, as she tries to navigate life after the Clone Wars and during the reign of the Galactic Empire, seemingly to pick up an unlikely new ally in the form of a young Force-sensitive child on the run from the Imperial Inquisitorius. Meanwhile, Cad Bane's side of things will take us back into the bounty hunter's past as he confronts an old close friend that has since turned to the side of law enforcement. Now, presumably, Underworld should run 6 episodes long, 3 episodes apiece for Ventress and Bane. But hopefully now that we're well into the swing of things with the Tales anthology series, it can find a better balance between the stories that it wants to tell in the time it wants to tell them. Things that both Tales of the Jedi and Tales of the Empire both struggled with, according to this article that I'm sharing with you the information from. And I didn't have any issues with either of those series. Very much looking forward to this. And I like the fact that we're continuing with this anthology series. I was just completely unaware that we were going to be doing more of these. And again, going back to the marketing of Star Wars, these are things that would be fun to speculate on. Being told up front that, we knew these things were on the way, and I must have missed the information, but I think this is the first announcement that we would be getting another addition to the Tales anthology series, which raises the question of whether or not we will be getting more of these in the future. So this will be dropping on May the 4th, Star Wars Day, streaming on Disney Plus, and this is exactly the kind of content that I'd like to see more of on Disney Plus. They have never missed the mark, in my opinion, relating to the animation side of Star Wars storytelling. I haven't watched the very skewed Young Jedi Adventures. It's too young for me. My kids aren't that young anymore. I know others have watched it, and maybe one day I'll sit down if I'm bored and give those a watch. That being said, these anthology series, Rebels, Clone Wars, have all been top notch, which has me very much excited for this new series as well.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
Okay, before I get to some commentary on A New Hope, we did get a leak of the runtimes for Andor. And it looks like they're going to be very much on par with what we saw in the original series, running anywhere between, I believe, 43 minutes and 56-plus minutes, which also means that with 3 episodes airing every Tuesday for 4 weeks, we should be receiving a movie a week of Andor. 2 hours plus of content every Tuesday. And we have some emails this week, talkshownerd@gmail.com, that talk about how you plan on watching the Andor series. I still don't know yet. Basically, for me, it's going to come down to what my plans are on that Tuesday and how things shake out on if I end up watching it all in one shot or if I spread it out over the week. Either way, you'll certainly be getting some commentary every single week here on a Star Wars show. I just don't know if it'll be every week, all 3 episodes, or it'll have to be broken up over the course of the 4 weeks of the series. But I'm not sure what brought me to watch the original trilogy this weekend. I don't know if it was because just a promotion of Andor or if there were some videos that were on YouTube. Maybe that's where it came from. I was watching some documentaries on the original trilogy on the prequel trilogy on YouTube, and Caravan of Garbage was one of the was one of the series that I was enjoying quite a bit. I like the commentary from those guys. And I decided, you know what? It's been a long time since I've just sat down and watched Star Wars. I might have been reminiscing a bit of my childhood. Because I remember just as a kid, you would just put it on. Right? We didn't have the luxury of all the Star Wars content that we have now. My gosh, my little, 10, 11-year-old brain, when I finally got a copy of Star Wars on VHS, probably could not have fathomed the amount of Star Wars content that, if I was told that we would have all the content that we have now. And I thought, you know what? I just want to sit down and watch A New Hope. That movie still holds up in almost every single way. I walked away from it thinking, from now on, when somebody asks me what my favorite Star Wars movie is, I'm going to say A New Hope. The one that I've enjoyed watching the most as of late has been The Rise of Skywalker. Being the newest one, it has so many different elements of Star Wars that I love. But Deserted Island, being able to take only one Star Wars film, it's going to be A New Hope. But watching it this time around, I was reminded again of one of the biggest reasons that film was such a huge success. And it's not the reason, but it's a reason. And it rests in the powers of fathers and sons. First off, as I mentioned, the film is still an absolute blast to watch. It doesn't drag, even though it was made in 1977. The editing is so nice and tight. It just hums along. But right from the very beginning of the film, Luke's sense of longing, the moment that we end up meeting him, underscored by John Williams and his fantastic score, it was rooted in the absence of his father. Asking Uncle Owen about the droids, Obi-Wan and talking to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and when he's talking with Owen and talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi, that wizard is just a crazy old man. He died around the same time as your father. And Luke's response of, he knew my father? Uncle Owen just dismisses him. I told you to forget it. You knew, and Mark Hamill at such a young age being, such a, not a seasoned actor by any stretch, just really nailed the role. And maybe his acting was a little bit wonky, but at 5 years old, 6 and 7, I didn't know any better. I just knew that Luke never knew his dad. And while I couldn't relate because I knew my father, I was watching Star Wars in the theater when I first saw it, I could only fathom what that must have been like for him to not know his father. I mean, that's a pretty difficult concept and a bit of a frightening one at a young age, right? When he finally does catch up with Ben Kenobi, and they end up arriving in his hut, one of the first things Luke asks Ben about is his father. How did my father die? Of course, George Lucas hadn't fully fleshed things out yet. A young Jedi named Darth Vader. Now, when you retroactively look at it now based off of everything that we know, it makes some sense because he's not going to say a young Jedi named Anakin Skywalker. Wait, that was my dad? Of course not. And so you can extrapolate that Ben Kenobi was basically thinking Luke was so isolated he had no idea who Darth Vader was. But a young Jedi named Darth Vader, he betrayed and murdered your father. Luke very quietly saying, I wish I would have known him. And then, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi going into the chest, getting out the lightsaber. Your father wanted you to have this when you were old enough, but your uncle wouldn't allow it. Luke had a connection with Obi-Wan Kenobi as a person. Telling the hero's journey, this wise old mentor. But it was also because Ben and now the lightsaber that used to be the lightsaber of his father could help bridge the gap between him and the father that he never knew that he so wanted to have known. Now, again, I'm not getting into all of what transpires in The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I'm just focusing on the power of this element in the storytelling relating to A New Hope and why it was so successful. It ends up being the driving force, in my opinion, behind almost everything that motivates Luke throughout the rest of the story. Losing Ben, I imagined as a kid, was akin to feeling as if he had known his father and then lost his father. If he had gone and lost his father, were he to have ever known him? And as such still a child at the time, growing up with those films, starting off seeing the film at 5 years old, 6, 7, 8, going through the rest of the films and watching the original Star Wars over and over again, that theme of fathers and sons that carries through 5 and through 6. We connected to Luke in how we connected with our own fathers. Where, I was blessed enough to have been raised, by my father. If you were blessed enough, as I was, to have been raised by your father, right? As a 5-year-old kid seeing Star Wars, I had the utmost sympathy for Luke and how he must have felt not ever knowing his dad. You know, it is the classic hero's journey, but that father and son theme has been wholly absent from a lot of mainstream storytelling. And just a society at large. So much of what we see in our world today stems from, in my opinion, a lot of young men and children who grew up without fathers and a strong father. That's not to say that you can't be raised in a household without, a father and not be raised properly and have a good childhood. But it is to say that, in my opinion, if you want the best opportunity, and the data bears this out, for a child to succeed, it is with that strong mother and father relationship. And even when you do get that level of storytelling within modern, films, rarely does it hit the mark in the same way that it did for the original trilogy, and certainly the way that it did in that original Star Wars, before we even knew that it was Episode 4 and it was included on the opening crawl.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, let's get to your feedback this week. Email and YouTube. We first off start with Carl Frederick, who writes, I'll always watch this top 4 weekly TV show and or season 2 on the weekend with friends, a barbecue, and good drinks, just like I did with Game of Thrones, binge watching a few episodes at a time. Thank you, Carl. And that's, I kind of would like to wait until Friday to go and watch it every week so I can watch all 3 episodes in one sitting. I just don't know if I can hold off with new Star Wars sitting there on the streaming app. I don't know if I have that type of self-control. But thank you so much for reaching out this week. N. Blackie, 1948, says, John, have you seen these AI Star Wars shorts out there? I've seen a few. I don't think specifically the ones that you're referring to. Now anyone who wants to see their headcanon come to life can just plug an idea into AI, and it will generate pretty convincing scenes. Yeah, I need EMBARK ones created. I haven't done the time to do any examination yet, but I want some EMBARK battle scenes created. That would be awesome. There was one with Dooku having a conversation with Palpatine while waiting for Kenobi and Anakin to board General Grievous's ship. It's a scene from the novelization of Revenge of the Sith that wasn't in the movie, but it was a great part of the book. Now we can see it play out. In a weird way, I'm wondering if this will help squash some of the negativity. Now anyone can have the version of Star Wars they want by having AI generated. It's pretty incredible. It's still not entirely there yet, but it's come a pretty far in a few short years. Have you seen this? And if so, what are your thoughts? I have not seen that specifically, but if you want to sort of send that my way, I'd love to give them a watch. And yeah, I've been having regular conversations with one of the smartest guys I know, David Gartenstein-Ross. He's a counterterrorism analyst, but now, after starting a global counterterrorism corporation as the CEO, he's now handed that off to other individuals and now runs Valens Games, which is an AI based game generation platform. He's an expert in AI now, and we have bi-weekly conversations on my radio show discussing AI. And you're right, the advancements in AI in a short period of time have been nothing short of absolutely incredible. I'm just simply waiting for Skynet to go online. All right, let's get to the next email, and I have to apologize to the individual who wrote in. Once again, I made the mistake of copying and pasting your email to my notes without including your name, especially because you've been enjoying my books. So for that, I apologize. Please write me again so that I can give you proper credit next week. Having said that, this is what they had to say. A friend of the show. I've listened to books 2 and 3 now. I'm still very much enjoying your EMBARK series. Your writing is great as it keeps you interested in wanting to finish the next chapter to see what happens. I'm looking forward to the next book. Thank you so much for that. I really, really do appreciate it. I've actually been, and I know this sounds weird, and there's a division within authors of people who go back and reread their own books or listen to their audiobooks and people that don't. I have gone back and reread my own books and listened to my audiobooks, of which I did the narration for. I think it's partly due to the fact that I'm just so accustomed to hearing my own voice. But I wrote these stories because these are the stories of the films that I would love to go into the theater to go and see if it wasn't a Star Wars film. And so it makes sense that I would enjoy listening and reading them. Plus, I try to make myself a better writer by going back and reading or listening to my old material. That being said, I feel like every single book that I wrote in the 7-book series just gets better as my writing skill increases and my narration skill does. So the fact that you've made it through books 2 and 3 tells me that I'm confident you'll enjoy 5, 6, and 7 as well. And please write and let me know what you think. As for watching Andor, I'm hoping to watch an hour a night once my munchkin goes to bed. The trailers look great, so hopefully we get a great show. I also thought I'd include a picture of my lightsabers I talked about. I finally got them all set up, still hunting a few more. Yeah, so I do remember that I did write this person back, and I saw the picture, and I was actually jealous of your collection. It's pretty awesome. So thank you so much for writing, and again, apologize for not bringing over your name when I cut and pasted to my notes this week. And lastly, friend of the show, Star Wars Santa, as always, check out his fantastic YouTube channel, Star Wars Santa. I'm with you, John. It'd be much better for me if they release these episodes on Friday or Saturday. At least they're releasing them at a viewable time for the Eastern time zone. It's much better than those old 3 a.m. drops. No, I completely agree. And thank you so much, Star Wars Santa. It's always great to hear from you. All right, listen, speaking of my books, I hope you'll take an opportunity, if you haven't already, to head on over to Amazon.com and check out my science fiction space opera adventure series. 7 books in all. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction. I wrote them for adults, but they are great for ages 11 and older. Available in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, free on Kindle Unlimited if you're a subscriber, and on ebook as well. The description for book 1 in the series, Taft has found something, and humanity won't survive without it. When ship mechanic Taft Guardia agrees to help headstrong pilot Kate Amaro investigate a cryptic message from her late aerospace engineer father, they embark on a perilous journey of discovery amid a looming planet-wide catastrophe. With 2 rival megacorporations on the brink of interstellar war, Taft and his ragtag crew on board the Anniversary discover what may be the only hope of saving Earth's evacuees from annihilation, if they can survive the apocalypse first. It's a fast-paced, action-packed, epic science fiction adventure without an agenda. If you like your sci-fi space opera to be epic, filled with romance, really cool technology, a lot of unique action sequences, EMBARK is absolutely perfect for you. Again, a friend or a family member. Head on over to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, E-M-B-A-R-K, and John, J-O-N, Justice. Listen, until next week, and my first thoughts on, Andor Season 2 isn't for a few weeks, so whatever news transpires between now and then. And it is going to be a busy week. We've got Star Wars Celebration coming up in Japan. Certainly I'll have full coverage of that on the Star Wars show you're currently listening to, and reviews of Andor Season 2 as the series gets underway on the 22nd of this month. Until next week, I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My